Good morning, everybody. Feel free to take a little stretch break or bathroom break if you need it between sessions. My name's Erin Belfort. I'm going to be the moderator for the next panel. We're going to be talking about really the impacts of social media on teen mental health from more of a clinical perspective. I am a child, adolescent, and adult psychiatrist. I work clinically in Portland, Maine, and I have a faculty teaching appointment as an associate professor of psychiatry at Tufts University School of Medicine. And I've long been interested in social media and the impacts on kids and on developing brains. I'm currently the co-chair of the media committee at the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, or ACAP. And I'm really excited to be here with some distinguished panelists this morning. So I'm going to do a really brief kind of paragraph introduction of each of them. They have just a couple of slides to tell you a little bit more about their work. And then we're going to have a discussion about risks, benefits of social media, and there will be time for questions via Slido at the end. So first we have Ben Forman. Ben is an honors engineering student at the University of Colorado and a passionate advocate for digital wellness. After growing up deeply affected by social media, experiencing anxiety, insecurity, and constant comparison, Ben began to reimagine his life online during the COVID-19 pandemic. He took a break from social media, embraced mindfulness, and has since committed to daily meditation, including attending multiple week-long to month-long retreats. Ben has led a number of school-based mental health initiatives that center on digital detox, mindfulness, vulnerability exploration, and gratitude journaling to support his peers. He has spoken in front of hundreds of students on the topic of social media and has been awarded grants and fellowships as a Look Up Youth Innovator, a Carnegie Young Fellow, a Savitz Scholar for CU Boulder. Through his role as a producer of a documentary called Disconnected and as a speaker for the nonprofit No So November, Ben aims to bring this message of intentionality, awareness, and youth empowerment to schools across the country. Please join me in welcoming Ben Forman. All right, next on our panel, we have Dr. Annie Maheux. Annie is an assistant professor of psychology and neuroscience at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and the Winston Family Distinguished Fellow at the Winston Center on Technology and Brain Development. She earned her PhD in developmental and social psychology with a minor in quantitative methodology from the University of Pittsburgh in 2023 and her BA from the University of Vermont in 2015. At UNC, Dr. Maheux directs the Social Environments and Adolescence Lab, where she and her team study how sociocultural and technological contexts shape adolescent development, with a particular emphasis on gender and well-being. Her research leverages cutting-edge, data-intensive methods to better understand the digital lives of adolescents. Current and future projects explore heterogeneity in media use and its effects, reciprocal pathways between digital engagement and psychological well-being, and the emerging developmental risks and opportunities posed by generative AI. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Annie Maheux. And our last panelist is Dr. Meredith Gansner. She is an assistant professor and board-certified child psychiatrist at the University of Rochester Medical Center. She has previously worked at the Harvard Medical School-affiliated Boston Children's Hospital and Cambridge Health Alliance. She received her BA from Williams College, her MD from Rutgers, New Jersey Medical School. Following medical school, she completed her residency training in adult psychiatry at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center and Brigham and Women's Hospital, and her child psychiatry fellowship at Cambridge Health Alliance. Her research explores high-risk digital media use in adolescents, particularly those who have existing psychiatric diagnoses, and the use of smartphone-based digital phenotyping and ecological momentary assessment to assess and manage high-risk digital media habits. For her research, she has received a K-23 Career Development Award from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, a DuPont Warren Fellowship Grant, and Shore Faculty Development Award through Harvard Medical School. She has pilot funding through a P50 Alacrity Center grant. She is also an active member of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. She's written articles about mental health and digital media for the Psychiatric Times, WBUR, the Boston Globe, Slate Magazine, and she's the author of the book Teen Depression Gone Viral, which is at the bookstore out here, about the complexities of treating adolescent depression in the digital age. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Meredith Gansner. Thanks, everybody. So we'll have Ben come up first and do a couple slides, and then Annie, and then Meredith.
Thank you, Erin. Yeah. Could I get my...
We could switch, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Always fun for technology. Okay. I'm hoping to talk, as you know, about social media use and adolescent mental health, but really from a clinical perspective, as I am first a clinician and a clinician researcher in a field that I like to call research that IRBs hate, since I ask a lot of questions to teens about suicide and violence and drug use, and it gives IRBs headaches, for sure. We all know at this point, everyone in this room knows that social media is connected to numerous adverse mental health outcomes in youth, including in some more recent longitudinal studies that have also supported this. And while I think that the degree to which social media platforms are the sole contributor to these mental health outcomes remains debatable, certainly to the parents that I see, and to parents I think that many of us see, social media is considered the sole contributor. This 2025 Pew Research survey asked parents, what negatively impacts teens, and social media was cited as the top reason given of a negative impact towards teens. And in the work that I do in the hospital, I can say that more often than not, parents will say it was social media. Social media somehow contributed to this, whether the kid's coming in with depression or they're coming in with aggression and ADHD. So it's certainly on the forefront of most parents' minds. And the reasons for this, I think, are with merit, because there isn't a lot of research out there that looks at high-risk social media use, specifically in youth who have existing psychiatric difficulties or who are invulnerable in that way. But what does exist out there is concerning. For example, there have been a few studies that have looked at inpatient psychiatric admissions and how social media and digital media may be related to their admission, and have found that ranging between 11 to 40% of these admissions are related to digital media, social media in some way. We just completed a study of all the psychiatric consultations. This was at Boston Children's Hospital, where I was literally until a week ago. And we looked at all the psychiatric crisis consultations that came in over the course of 2 years. So it was about 3,500 consultations, and found that about 20% of them were in some way related to digital media or social media related issue. And that could have been cyberbullying, threats on social media, posting self-injurious content, kids looking up for ways to harm themselves online, or kids that are victims of predatory social media relationships, like being in a relationship with an adult, for an example. And the 20% is very likely an underestimate, because we don't have, I think most hospitals don't have a systematic standardized assessment approach to social media or digital media use, especially in crisis settings. So there are many more cases that were likely related to digital media and social media that just weren't captured in our study. Some of you may remember, hopefully, 2 years ago, I was fortunate enough to talk about pilot data that informed my K-23 project, looking at social media and its relationship to procurement of drugs and alcohol. I'm fortunately in the last few weeks of data collection on my K-23 project, and we've been, over the course of 90 days, monitoring youth, their social media habits, collecting data from their smartphones, and asking them about drug use and their experiences online. We've had over 100 participants ranging from 15 to 20 years in age, and have found that in the course of that 90-day period, A majority of my participants have said that they have been contacted through a social media platform to buy drugs or alcohol online. Again, these are all kids under the age of 21. And related to that, about a third of the participants said that not in their lifetime, but at some point during that 90-day period, they have been successfully able to purchase drugs and alcohol using a social media platform. So some interesting things to think about there. And then lastly, we recently finished a survey study in the emergency room at Boston Children's, where we asked teens with suicidal ideation how they use social media platforms to understand their suicidality and to message others about their suicidal ideation. And found that about a third of them have used social media platforms and the internet to find ways to harm themselves. And it's notable that that's not always the initial intent. We had one participant in the study say that even going online on a social media platform to look up ways to alleviate suicidal ideation, to feel better, you can easily then be fed content about ways to harm oneself through a video and find plans that are sort of offered to you in content, even if the initial intent is to try to find ways to not act on those suicidal thoughts. So, a lot of concerning data out there, especially for high-risk youth. And so in that lens, I think it's very easy to villainize social media platforms and see them as a sort of singular evil entity. But that is, I think many of us know, not helpful, because it is an incredibly complex relationship, especially for youth that are marginalized or in psychiatric distress. Many of the patients that I see, they are turning to social media platforms to distract themselves from their symptoms, to find others with shared experiences, or to find more information about their gender identity or about their psychiatric diagnosis. They are finding benefits from social media platforms, right? They keep going back to the platforms, and most of us don't go back to things repeatedly unless we're perceiving we're getting some benefit from it. But of course, every time they go on the platforms, this then exposes them to potential risks, like people offering them drugs and alcohol through Snapchat, or hate messaging, or news stories that could be triggering, right? Which then can worsen psychiatric symptoms. So how do we make sense of this, the pros and cons of social media use? I don't have the perfect answer for that, but I will say as a clinician, I think we really need to do a better job identifying the high-risk youth, figuring out those youth that are going to be prone to using social media for significant benefits, and then also falling prey to certain risks. For example, LGBTQ plus youth. There have been studies that suggest how important social media platforms are to this population of youth in trying to, again, figure out their gender identity in order to get LGBTQ specific information that maybe they cannot get within their actual kind of real world community. So these can be incredibly beneficial. But again, there are going to be risks, maybe unique to the LGBTQ community. The study that we did about suicidality in the emergency room found that these youth tended to be more likely to message others about their suicidality and also to look up information about suicide using social media platforms specifically, which I think is incredibly important to think about when you're considering that the funding to the Trevor Project was recently cut, and there's a limit to the amount of AFSP-approved information sites out there about suicidality, and we were thinking about the kinds of content that youth are accessing. And then similarly, racial minority youth. There are great papers out there, this is one of them, talking about how critical social media platforms can be when used constructively to help with racial ethnic identity formation. Again, especially in those areas where you might not have people around you that identify similarly. But again, there's a flip side. We just published a paper in the Journal of Ethnicity and Substance Abuse about unique risks to racial ethnic minority youth when it comes to drug-related content exposure online. We found that racial ethnic minority youth were significantly more likely to be fed this content through social media platforms than white non-Latin youth. And furthermore, while all groups had a significant relationship between being exposed to drug-related content and engaging in drug use, that relationship was significantly strengthened in specific racial ethnic minority subgroups. So unique risks, unique benefits. I just want to end on the idea of digital literacy, and I know that's been touched upon already many times in just the less than 24 hours this conference has been going on. But I think it has tremendous potential, but the studies have really not borne out in terms of it being highly efficacious. Part of that might be in part because the vehicle of administration of the intervention is not the right one. Maybe adults shouldn't be administering it. But I also think it's worth considering that the type of interventions that we are offering in terms of digital literacy may not be tailored correctly to the youth that they are given to. So this box is from a review paper that I did for Pediatric Clinics of North America. I was at an issue on social media and pediatric mental health with editors of Dr. Weigel and Belfort, the esteemed. And we really tried to focus in the review article on the importance of considering an individual's unique social media habits and what benefits and risks were unique to that youth when trying to craft an intervention and psychoeducation for the parents and the family unit and the child in intervening upon high-risk social media use. So that is all for me. I thank you. Those are my references, and we'll move on to Annie.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. So my name's Annie, and I work at the Winston National Center on Technology and Brain Development is the current name. So I'm in part supported by the Winston Family Foundation through the center. I also am supported by the National Institutes of Mental Health, and I also currently collaborate with Aura, a phenomenal organization. You can find their table right outside, and I have nothing else to disclose. So we all know that kids in at least the United States, according to Representative Pew Research Center data, use the internet a lot. Pretty much everyone accesses the internet every single day, and about half of US teens say that they're online almost constantly. So we know that screen time is pretty heavy in terms of our teens in the US. But there's also been a lot of research looking at how self-reported screen time use or self-reported social media use and mental health are associated. And this research has shown pretty unequivocally that this is not just about screen time. There's something more complicated going on here. It's not just how much time kids are spending on devices or on platforms. So questions like, is social media good or bad? Should kids use it or not? These might not be the best questions to ask if we're trying to understand how and why exactly social media is related to mental health. So there's two important questions that I ask in my research, and I'm primarily a basic scientist. I study adolescent development in the digital age. And those have to do with understanding how social media is different from in-person experiences. So I draw on the transformation framework and similar affordances theories that argue that there are specific features of social and other digital media that transform the experiences and the social interactions that kids have online. This includes that these content are often highly visual, so photos and videos are at the center of social media experiences. They're also available 24/7. Kids can access social media content at all times, day or night. They're relatively permanent, and I realize there's a minor emoji issue here. The content is hosted online often in perpetuity, for better or worse. They're also relatively public, so kids have access to broad global audiences of people and are able to share their posts to those audiences. They also afford asynchronous communication. There's a time lag between when a message is sent and when a message can be received. They also afford relatively few social cues. So many of the things that make social interaction in the offline world really rich and meaningful, like body language and tone of voice or physical touch, these things are often absent in the social media landscape. They also afford quantifiable metrics of peer approval. So peer approval, popularity, these things have been around probably since the advent of adolescence. But the quantifiable nature of these features changes the way that kids are responding to their peers and reacting to content. And finally, the content that kids see online are curated by algorithmic feed recommendation systems that are created not to show kids the content that they want to see necessarily, but the content that will keep them on the platform longer. But there's also some other sources of heterogeneity. So these features mean that digital media is a really, really complex context in which kids are developing. And that leads to things like different types of content, different behaviors, different use patterns. So for example, kids may have access to mental health content that could be beneficial, it could be factually accurate, but they could also see information that glorifies or perpetuates mental health challenges. They may also experience frequent notifications that lead to things like compulsive checking or problematic social media use. And so there's many different features and affordances and functions of social media that make that landscape so complex and so heterogeneous such that every kid has a different experience when they go online, making it really challenging to measure and almost impossible to understand that experience if we just capture screen time. But there's another important source of heterogeneity that our team has been working on as well, which is that individuals are different from each other. And we've known this. All of developmental psychology has been trying to understand how kids may differ from each other in terms of things like gender, biological sex, racial ethnic identity, sexual orientation. And all of these things can shape both how kids select media, how they're motivated to engage with media, but also how they respond to the content that they see or the interactions that they have. So there's a variety of different work that's emerging in these different spaces. For example, to understand how age and developmental stage might change how kids are experiencing digital media. We know that a 13-year-old or a 10, 11, 12-year-old who's on social media may have different experiences, and they may respond to those differently than a 17 or an 18-year-old. And so these various sources of heterogeneity can better help us triangulate who's at risk and how we can help them. And we recently wrote this up in a review paper you can find at that QR code. So much of my work focuses on cutting-edge methodologies that can help us, with more precision, understand these experiences. And we also recently wrote a paper that identifies some of those methodological opportunities for the field. So I'll really briefly go through some of these. But I think we need to understand the objective experiences kids are having online. So observing what they're doing, what they're exposed to through things like data donation packages, passive sensing, things like screenomics, which takes a screenshot of kids' smartphone screens every few seconds when they have their smartphone open. These things give us objective data on what's happening on the device. But we shouldn't forget the subjective experience, which is also really important. How are kids thinking? What are they feeling when they're using the device or the platform? We also really need to understand bidirectional effects. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that who a kid is, maybe their pre-existing vulnerability or sensitivities, can shape how they choose and select and respond to social media, and that may in turn shape how media influences them and their mental health. So we need longitudinal designs to understand this. And then finally, we need to understand all the complex interactive effects. Kids are engaging in positive, negative, solitary, social experiences often simultaneously on their devices, and understanding the complexity of that and how those work together can give us a better picture of what's going on. Thanks very much.
Hello, everyone. My name is Ben Forman, and I am a incoming sophomore at the University of Colorado. I wanted to give you guys a brief kind of introduction on how I got into this space. So this first picture up there, that's taken in 2020, like 2 weeks before the pandemic started. And like most 14-year-old boys, I used to think that I was like really cool. I know better now, but I used to. And I also used to be really anxious. I used to have panic attacks, constantly in this state of fear, didn't have the best friends, was really lonely, and I was constantly on my phone. And it wasn't until the pandemic where I started to see another opportunity, another way to kind of live my life. So I took a detox from social media. I started meditating, and I felt this giant weight that started getting lifted off my shoulders. It was profound. So fast forward 2 years, I wanted to try and bring some of the things that I'd learned, some of the things that I'd experienced to some of my peers, some of my friends. So I led this project called the Happiness Project. It was 2 weeks, social media detox, daily meditation, gratitude journaling. The final project was you had to write a letter to someone you love, and then the surprise was that you had to call them after, and you had to read them the letter, which just warmed my heart. One of my friends called his brother, and he was just sobbing. And he's like, Ben, thank you so much. Like, I never thought that, it would mean that much to me. So now, about a year ago, I was thinking, how can I take some of the initiatives I've done, some of the things I've learned and experienced, and how can I bring it to a wider audience? Not just my community, but kids across the country. And I'd already worked on documentaries before, and I thought to myself, if I can make a film that spoke to kids, that was made by youth, for youth, understood this problem because we'd actually experienced this problem, we could actually, inspire kids to maybe change their relationships with technology. It's not about getting rid of social media, but it's about taking agency over your time and spending it the way you want to be spending it, which a lot of kids aren't these days. And so that's where this idea for Disconnected came along. That's the documentary I'm working on. And so I could have shown you the trailer for the film, which I'd love to share. But instead, what I want to do is show you a promo video that we made that I think tries to get at the message of what we're trying to spread. So if we go, oh, I have the control. Okay. Can I? Oh, no. Okay. I think this was the other slide. Okay. So I don't know. If we go back, is there the video? Like, can we play that? Because, yeah. Okay. Never mind. I will share the promo video, and you guys all can see it. PowerPoint. Not my favorite. Okay. And now I can't move it. And okay. There we go. So we have the awareness. We need the culture change. I think that's what Disconnected is trying to accomplish. You know, I think this panel, this conference is evidence that there's so many people interested in this space, so many people who are aware of these issues. But what we need is to drive change. And I think youth are in a unique position to drive that change because we grew up on these platforms, right? And so what I want to go to do is go into schools across the country, play the film, but talk to kids and ignite conversations, ignite reflections. Because I think when you put people in a position where it's not about guilt, it's not about feeling bad about my relationship, it's feeling this like excitement about, wow, I have so much opportunity to spend my time the way I want to be spending it in community. Like, I feel excited about that and about spreading that. And so if we can kind of ignite that across the country, I think we're in a unique position to make some meaningful change. So yeah.
All right. Oh, it is working. Good. Thank you, everybody. Ben, I saw your promo video, and it's really awesome, and I hope we can find a way to share it with everybody. I'll just sort of summarize, just so people have a sense, if that's okay. Ben sort of approaches these two, looks like teenage girls on the street, and basically gives them a challenge to not use social media for a period of time, and if they do it, they get a cash prize. And then sort of interviews them afterwards. And it's pretty profound. I mean, one of the girls said she hasn't ever picked up a book before, and she got so bored that she picked up a book and read a book. And they talked about really the increased connectedness to each other, to their peers, to their friends, to their family. So it was pretty powerful, and I hope you all get a chance to see it. So I wanted to start off by thinking about this issue that's so complex because, as you and many others have pointed out, there's such heterogeneity in the apps, in the platforms, and then in how kids use them, right? And I think we've all moved beyond just screen time limits, sort of thinking about quantity, but really thinking about quality. You know, what are kids doing when they're online, in online spaces? And so I'm curious to learn from you all from kind of research perspective, lived experience, clinical experience, how you think about sort of assessing the pros versus cons of social media for a particular youth, maybe not for a whole big group.
Sure, I can start. So the way that I think about it is, am I moving towards something, or am I moving away from something? So when I think about all the benefits of social media, I think about moving towards something. Am I moving towards community? Am I reaching out to someone who I haven't seen in a while? Am I trying to find, a unique part of my identity that maybe I haven't gotten to see in my school or reflect in my community? I think when we're moving towards a certain aspect of who we are, I think these apps are phenomenal at providing us those tools. When I think we're moving away from something, which is how a lot of us use these apps also, when I'm moving away from my anxiety, from my discomfort in a social situation, when I'm feeling overwhelmed and I'm trying to escape from something and I'm using these apps as that escape, I think that's where we see a lot of the harms. And so I can't speak to the research side, but what I can say is from personal experience and from all the work I've done with other kids, I think when you make that distinction, I think you start to see a lot of the nuance in this issue kind of come to fruition.
I would add that I know we've moved beyond screen time or use of social media or no use of social media, but there is such a complex relationship between the engagement with the content and kind of where a person and an individual patient is at. I think maybe early on one could say, well, for these youth who maybe have depression or have anxiety, this type of platform is not helpful or is problematic for them. But I think it's so much more nuanced than that, because certainly what we see for individuals who have depression or anxiety, it's that depending on where they are in their own psychiatric state and their own symptoms, use of a specific platform can be helpful or hurtful, but it really is about where they are and their ability to kind of take a look inward and recognize through their own learning about social emotional learning and capturing their own mental state and saying, am I at a place right now where going on this platform for 2 hours is going to be helpful? Thinking about self-injurious videos, right? There have been papers saying that for some youth, you can go on these platforms and it can be incredibly helpful, and you can say, I have skills and tools that I'm gaining to not act on cutting myself, but then at another point, maybe when they're in more distress, they go on these platforms, they see these videos, and they're triggered, and then they engage in cutting. So it's really about understanding that complex relationship between a specific platform and where internally a child is at.
So, unlike Ben, I can't speak to the personal experience part. I can speak to the research part, but I personally don't use social media. For me, the benefits just don't outweigh the costs, and so I've chosen not to access those platforms. I find that text messages, group chats, that sort of accomplishes the goals that I personally have for social connection and community. But I think when it comes to understanding the positive impacts of social media, we have to listen to youth. We have to listen to people who've grown up using these platforms and people who are currently in middle school and high school who are using these platforms. I think that the benefits that they experience matter. I think we have to balance their experiences with the wisdom that we may have as adults to understand the potential harms that they don't see as well. But I also want to share a result from the research in my lab that we haven't published yet. We're currently working on it. But we've studied positive and negative experiences among the same group of kids. And originally we thought that maybe positive experiences would have benefits and negative experiences would have detriments. And when you study these things in isolation, that's often what you find. But we used a particular statistical model called mixture modeling, where we can understand complex nonlinear interactions essentially between these variables. And what we find actually is that the kids who have the highest levels of both positive and negative experiences, so the kids who are really, really high in both of those things, they're reporting the highest levels of depressive symptoms. So we find that there's something more complex here than just that good experiences are good and bad experiences are bad. There may be something such that kids who are really invested in social media, who find the greatest benefits, the social connection, the feelings of affirmation or approval, they're also yoked to those negative experiences and the turbulence that often comes with social media. And social media is designed to be turbulent. And so those kids who are having these great positive experiences are maybe actually most at risk. And so when we're thinking about potential positives and negatives, we have to realize that social media is a complex web and an ecology that kids are experiencing, where it's really, really hard to isolate those positive experiences without getting some of those negatives.
Yeah, I think we probably can all agree, whether we like it or not, these apps and platforms are maybe not going anywhere. And so I'm curious, thinking about how do we help, our own children, the kids we work with as research subjects, learn to have a healthier relationship with their screen media use. And, I think we adults often live in this danger paradigm world, right? And I sometimes imagine us trying to talk to children or in schools, and we're like the Charlie Brown teachers, like wah, 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 wah. Like nobody, that doesn't resonate with kids. The danger paradigm, if you send a sext message, you're gonna have child porn charges. That doesn't resonate with kids, really. So how do we engage with youth, Ben, to do more effective intervention in communities and families and schools, and for those of us that are clinicians, in our clinical offices?
Yeah, I mean, that question is the one that, we're constantly asking ourselves as we're creating this film, and the movement around it is like, kids have been told phones are bad for their whole lives, and yet that doesn't do anything, right? So that's clearly not the route that we should be taking. I think in terms of the film that we're trying to do, I think it's about, like, even as far as like editing the film, not like a documentary, but like a YouTube video, because kids don't watch documentaries today, but they watch YouTube, right? So like, can we give them a content structure that actually fits what they do watch? And then in terms of the way that we talk about the issue, I think it's usually from a place of like fear and like, oh, this is bad for you, it's harmful. I think I'm more focused on not really social media and the apps. I care more about like the opportunity of the time that you could be spending in other places. And I think if we frame it in that way, and we kind of have the internal reflection of, hey, how am I actually using these apps? Because I think we can incite that when we go into schools. And then the opportunity of where we could go, I think when you inspire people to kind of reimagine their relationship with their phones, I think the hope is more powerful in that situation. And so hopefully with that, along with community and school-wide competition, like that's another thing we're piloting is like, if we go into a school, we present, we talk, but on top of that, like, let's have a competition where, there's an app you can download on your phone that tracks, your screen time, and you set a goal for yourself. And each grade competes against each other. Who can match their goal most effectively, right? Like, how can we create competitions that are actually fun? Kids are enjoying it. It builds community. I think we have to think about this problem in a different way than it has been.
Any other thoughts about that question? How do we engage youth more effectively?
Trying to figure that one out. I mean, I like to think I'm cool, but I'm not. I've reached the stage where I'm no longer cool as a child psychiatrist.
I think you're cool, Meredith.
Thank you. No, but I agree. I think you have to ask the youth. It's so critical in this research that we involve both panels of youth, having youth advisory boards, also having youth advisory boards that are composed of specific high-risk youth that may be more vulnerable to societal inequities, which then also feeds into kind of social media risk inequities. So I think that's just so critical in all of this.
I agree. I think we have to talk to kids. We have to understand what they're experiencing, because what they're experiencing may be different than what another kid is experiencing, and really listening to the perceived benefits or harms that they experience is critical to help them make these intentional choices about how they're spending their time online and offline. There's also some, I think, really compelling research that shows that if we teach kids, if we don't not just tell kids the harms, but teach them everything that we know about the attention economy, about the ways that these companies are intentionally trying to hijack their attention and their agency, that kids are really interested in that. They don't like that, as no one does. But giving them all of that information and all of those tools can help them make those more intentional, values-aligned choices.
Yeah, I find that really helpful in my clinical work. I do a lot of family therapy, and I find that arguments around media and screens and phones are probably the number one source of conflict in families who have teenagers at home. And so sometimes just offering space to have conversation and be curious about it can be really helpful. But nobody wants to be duped or tricked, and kids are smart, right? And if we teach them some of these potential downsides, we can help maybe create a little more ambivalence about their use, and then they might be more willing to say, give up an app that they know is problematic or that they feel conflicted about, rather than maybe taking away their phone entirely, which is what parents sometimes do.
I think it's also important to understand the functionality of the social media use for that teen, right? So if we're saying, you need to stop using this, and we're not offering anything in its stead, and we're saying just, okay, bye-bye coping skill, good luck, try something else, and we're not truly sitting with the teen trying to understand what they are trying to use the social media platform for, whether it's to avoid symptoms, right, gain connection to others, get information. We have to be ready as parents, teachers, clinicians to offer something else. That's also, I think, where societally speaking, we need to do better in offering more infrastructure to give teens avenues for kind of meaningful activities that bring them self-worth, that do not involve likes and artificial metrics and platforms. But that's a larger issue, for sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback on that because I think, like taking away the phone and not having an alternative for how you spend your time, like, that's one of the reasons why I think mindfulness is so powerful, because it's like, I don't think our generation knows how to sit in silence or be bored, right? That's like a foreign concept. And so if we can't teach a skill that actually focuses on sitting with silence and being bored and having nothing going on and like feeling okay with that, because if we don't, it is terrifying to sit in that silence. So I think that's kind of my interest and why mindfulness was so powerful to me, but why I think it can be powerful for, our generation, because it kind of hits the exact pinnacle of what social media and all these constant simulations have provided for us, which is this immediate escape from silence and boredom. And so if we can give kids a skill that actually teaches them how to sit with it, I think then it's not as scary, right?
And if I can add one more piece to these great points, I think another consideration is that I hear from many parents that they see the choice of giving or taking away the phone as kind of a lose-lose. So maybe the phone is causing some harms, but not having the phone may also isolate a child from their peer network, which is really important for adolescents. Connecting with peers, learning from peers is critically important to that developmental stage. And I will say, from my understanding of the literature, we do not yet know which of those harms a parent should choose. There are likely different choices parents should make for different kids, but that's an empirical question that if we had a big enough study, it would be quite a big study, but we could test that question. That's an important question that we don't yet know the answer to. And so many parents, I think, are acting blindly in that situation of not knowing which harm to choose, and it's still unclear.
All right, thanks everybody. I'm going to transition to audience questions. Looks like we have a number of them. And it looks like these are getting upvoted, so I'll start with the most popular. This is maybe the most difficult too. So the question is, are we losing focus on important social issues by only addressing problematic behaviors online and ignoring offline structural inequalities? Before you all jump in, the first thought that came to mind for me was this analogy of the double-edged sword. And Common Sense Media did a really lovely report maybe a year or so ago with that title, the double-edged sword, talking about particularly for marginalized youth, so for like LGBTQ plus youth, for Black and brown youth, they both experience pro-social positive outcomes from social media, and they experience discrimination, harassment, bullying in online spaces. So the realities of the real world are in fact happening for these youth in online and offline spaces. But just wondering what you all think about this big, important question.
I mean, hell yes, that is for sure. I think this is such a larger issue than just use of technology or no. Because again, kind of going back to what I said before, right? If there aren't systems in place that will help to provide outlets that are non-screen outlets for families that don't have the means to provide other activities, right? If there aren't community centers or the school can't provide after-school activities and a parent is working multiple jobs, it is very understandable that a child is just going to go home and go on screens. And we know that by and large, the youth that are most impacted by this are going to be youth of color, youth of low SES. And so we need to be incredibly mindful of that. And as a clinician, I always have to remind myself that I cannot be judgmental when families are coming in and saying that they have provided their children screens. I remember during the pandemic, I worked inpatient psychiatry at the time, and parents trying to do remote schooling with their children while holding down their job. And so often, and especially for youth who were on the spectrum, parents, the only thing they could think of was to provide a screen for their child. And then, unfortunately, when they tried to then take that screen away, it would end in violence or self-injurious behavior. We had like an uptick in youth coming in due to sextortion issues. I mean, it was it was so painfully obvious that parents felt like they had absolutely no other choice because they were essential workers and they had to keep working. They had to feed their families. And so we need to remember that our guidance cannot be so narrow-minded and short-sighted as to not see all the struggles that families are going through to just kind of make it through right now, and that sometimes screens seem to be the only option without thinking about providing other ways to back up those families and help them.
Yeah, I agree. I think the answer is yes. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time, and I think this is an important issue, as are many others. And kids are growing up in really complex environments, online and offline. And I think all these other things do sometimes, we lose attention on those things because we are focusing on this one. And I do think we need to balance the complexity of the social world and the current culture that we're living in the United States at least, that may have really unique impacts on diverse kids.
All right, what are the panel's thoughts about certain governments' approaches to age? Oh, sorry, they're moving on me.
It's now the second question down, I think.
Now the second. Okay, what are the panel's thoughts about certain governments' approaches to age-based bans on social media? How effective will this solution be in the long run?
Probably as effective as it was when they said you have to be over 18 to go on social media platforms. That worked out real well. I remember seeing like my 12-year-old cousin on platforms and thinking, where did the time go? He's 18. And then realizing, no, that was not naive me. Those kids were signing up. Again, I think it goes back to this sort of concrete idea that for youth at a certain age, at an exact certain age, they will be capable of going on these platforms in a safe way. And that is a binary view that is overly simplistic. There are going to be some youth that may be more mature or may, for other reasons, really benefit from having some sort of engagement with, again, responsible engagement with social media platforms from an earlier age. There are probably 16, 17-year-olds out there that we might need to hesitate and offering free reign of social media platforms. My daughter being one of them when she gets older, right? We have to just, as parents and again, as teachers and clinicians, we have to recognize that these are individual decisions and each person is different. And I mean, there was really there's no like evidence-based proof to say that like 13 is absolutely like the right age to have social media platforms. That's not, social media is too complex for that, right? And as we've been talking about in multiple talks, it's too complex an entity. So I'm not optimistic that that's going to work out so well, the age bans.
I think the risk of these types of bans is that we may implement something like this, pat ourselves on the back, and then call it a day. And I think that even with these bans, even if they're enforced effectively, which I think is a real open question still, there's so much more that kids need to learn about media literacy, about making intentional choices about their time, about navigating this digital world where not only they, but their parents and their teachers are using these platforms, and those platforms are shaping their experiences, leads to just a more complex solution to this complex problem.
Yeah, I think I agree with what both of you have said. I think I'm probably more on the optimistic side of maybe seeing some of them and how they play out. Like, I'm interested to see what happens in Australia and like how culturally that kind of shapes behavior. I think I agree that there's no right age, definitely not developmentally, because every child is different. But I also think that the alternative to not having any guideline is that it maybe is just like the wild, wild west, and everyone kind of does what they want, and great parents who are on top of their children and understand them are going to probably take better care. But for parents who are overwhelmed and have other responsibilities, it's kind of like you don't have to think about it. So I think having maybe some regulation of like, if it's facial identification or something, and just creating barriers so that, I don't know. I think the barrier to entry should be higher than what it is right now.
And I will say, I mean, without regulation, we get the status quo. And so regulation is really complicated and tricky. And also, I think we're all in this room because we agree that the status quo is not working. And so we do need to, I think, try things and do our best to make them work.
As we were preparing for the panel, I think we all acknowledged that there would really need to be a multifactorial solution, right? That it's easy to sort of pass this hot potato and say it's somebody else's responsibility, but this is a place where kids and families themselves need to be involved. Schools, educators, mental health professionals, pediatricians, advocacy experts, policy experts. We really need everybody kind of pitching in here. So let's see, let's get another couple questions in. As we consider quality over quantity for screen time recommendations, is there still a place to provide guidance around social media time for teens?
This is a great question. I think a lot of my work argues that we should move beyond screen time, but I don't think we should leave it behind completely, because a lot of screen time is a problem. There has been some work, they call it the Goldilocks effect, that shows that about 2 hours is optimal, and less than that and much more than that is associated with lower mental health experiences. I think the tricky thing, though, is that there's probably an optimal level of screen time for different kids based on the specific things that they're doing with it, and I find myself very quickly moving more into that quality argument. But I do think that a lot of screen time is a problem for the reasons that we've been describing in terms of things like displacing healthy offline experiences. So I don't have the answer of what exactly that recommendation should be, but yes, I do think that those recommendations have a place in this world.
When I was 7 or 8, after dinner, my mom would always ask, I'd always ask my mom, I'd be like, can I have dessert? And she'd always be like, yes. And I always wanted Oreos. And I asked her, how many Oreos can I have? And she'd always say to me, well, Ben, how many Oreos do you think is a good amount of Oreos? And I always had to decide in my mind, like, okay, well, if I said 10, she's going to be like, no, but also I want more than one. And so I'd usually reach in around like 4 Oreos. And she's like, that sounds like a fair amount of Oreos. And then I'd eat 4, and I felt good about myself because I had the responsibility of like, oh, I chose how many Oreos I'm going to eat. So I think in terms of this talk on like screen time, I think it should be a conversation with a kid and feeling like they have agency over it. And obviously the parents there is kind of like that support system. Like, no, you can't spend 10 hours a day on your phone. But I think, 2 hours, that seems reasonable. And so it's not like top down, right? But it's like a kid having the agency over their time and feeling more like equipped to handle it.
Mm-hmm. I love how collaborative that was between you and your mom, and was thinking about just how important it is that we really know our own kids' risk and resilience factors pretty well. And so, like, as you were pointing out, Meredith, not all 13-year-olds are alike. I've worked with 13-year-olds who I feel like I'm sitting with a 20-year-old. They're so sort of intellectually thoughtful and mature, and others who maybe have intellectual disability or autism or ADHD, something else that makes it much more likely they're going to get into trouble in online spaces. And so part of that negotiation process is really knowing your own kid pretty well, or the kid you're working with clinically.
And the kid knowing themselves really well, getting to know themselves really well.
The context is really important. I wanted to just share something I was thinking about, which is in Portland, Maine, where I live. There was this news story that made national headlines recently because a group of parents, mostly moms, I think, got fed up with smartphones, and we haven't really made a lot of progress with bans in schools, which many people are working toward. And so they started a Google Doc where parents were putting in their landline numbers. Families went out and bought old school phones, like, you remember the ones with like the curly connect, I'm not talking about cordless phones, like old school landlines. People had to put in landlines. And there's this whole document that's spread around so kids can call each other, even 7, 8, 9-year-old kids, but it's on the landline that's in the family kitchen or living room. So there's maybe the pendulum is swinging in some places. All right, it looks like I see our time is up, or do we have a few more minutes? 2 more minutes, okay. Ben, what made you realize a break from social media was the shift you needed?
I didn't really know at the time. I was trying to get recruited to play Division I sports, and so I had this goal in my head. I was like, I want to achieve this. And I realized that if I did want to do that, which I, by the way, didn't. I failed pretty badly at playing Division I sports, but that's not the point of the story. I needed to have more time to train and do things that I actually wanted to be doing. And so what I would do is I would delete my accounts from Monday to Saturday, and then I'd re-download on Sunday just to like stay in touch with people. And so I kept that pattern going for maybe 2 months. And then after that time period, I was like, wow, like Sundays are the worst day of my week. Like I'm just re-downloading all these apps and like getting this wave of dopamine and then having this major crash and then feeling bad about myself. And then I delete, and then the rest of my week I kind of go back to normal and I feel good. And so that's kind of what inspired me. I was like, wait, if it's not providing benefit to me, like, you know, I should just go offline. And let me just preface, like, I don't think that's the right, like, route for every kid. Because for me, I think, like, I'm a neurotic Jew who's just, like, anxious to the core. And so that, I think these apps don't vibe well with me at all. But for other people, I think they provide a lot of benefit. I just think I think what is kind of societal, what is kind of something we all need to work on is just being more intentional, spending our time the way we want to. I think no matter if you use the apps or don't, that's something that should always be on the top of your mind.
Nice, thank you. Thank you to all my awesome panelists. Please give them a round of applause.